and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the improvisational storytelling podcast, where every week we bring you stories fresh out of the story oven. I am, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And I'm Seth.
And we are here to tell you a story. Well, folks, new story, new week, new story. What story elements do you guys have?
I have economic system.
I have something based on a book I'm reading.
And I have Pantheon. So who should go first? Seth, does yours have any world building to it? Mine has a bit of world building to it.
No, I'd say probably what I've got has more to do with the villain, I think.
Oh, great.
So
I
think Pantheon and where did you have Reed? You just said it.
I have economic system, and if I had to go first, I would put it in the context that I imagine it. So it maybe be better if you guys go first. Because I could fit it in. You know what I mean? It's one of those.
How about this? Levi, Reed, then me.
Sounds good to me. So the Pantheon, as we understand it in the current day and age of our story, is represented by these 10 statues that exist all around the world. There's some male, some female, but the primary thing with these is that as like in D&D, when you have certain gods, they're like, this is the god of this thing, and he is chaotic neutral, It's like really specific what these gods stand for, right? Unlike the sort of Judeo-Christian God, the God of the Bible, which is like, he kind of stands for everything. These 10 gods each are different aspects of reality. So there's a statue of a woman that's, 15 feet tall, and she's outside the oldest college / learning center / university style thing that exists, right? There's in the largest market in the world, there is a man standing there holding up scales, and he represents, and I don't have, strictly speaking, these individual gods, but there's 10 of them, and we can basically say that there's one for each kind of major system that exists. Like there's a harvest one, there's one in the middle of the ocean, there's one based around warfare, right? And the story behind these is that there were these ultra powerful beings that came to the earth, right? Whether they were traveled here on their spaceships or whether they teleported here with magic, I don't know. But they came here and they had a great war. It was a destructive war. They built up a society and then they killed each other off, and it was horrible and terrible. And sort of as this last team of 10, each personified a different aspect of civilization or of the earth and of prosperity of an ecosystem, all decided and designed together a race. They all together created a race of beings, right?
Not a running race?
No, not a foot race, but a race of beings. Whether that be humans or something that looks like humans, I don't know. We'll figure it out once we get the movie deal, right? But one thing that they couldn't do is they couldn't create a soul specifically. They could create a soul, but they couldn't create the sort of dynamic system of humanity, right? It was difficult for them to create an individual, right? They were super powerful kind of beings, but they didn't have the ability to do that. But what they did have the ability to do was to siphon off a bit of their own sort of creative life force and give it to the beings, right? So they created these sort of complex structures, and they created these beings, and then they gave themselves away to these beings, and in doing so, they kind of went into like a hibernation mode. So these statues are actually the beings, right? They're actually the beings, and they've just given so much of their life force away that they can kind of influence people, they can kind of answer prayer, they can kind of speak to people, but they need more people. So each of the statues has their hands in two different ways. One of them has their hand kind of with their palm facing up as if to accept, and one of them has their palm down as if to give. And if you touch the accept palm, then you give up the force that God gave to this race back to the God. And if they get enough, then they can come back. If everything is taken away from them, so if you were to touch the give then you would take some. And when they created the race, they created systems that distributed this power out, which then made it so that when people had children, the children still had this power, and it's just been kind of progressing down. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's like a fixed amount, and they created the sort of the perfect combination of each of their aspects distributed amongst the people in order to make people normal, right? But if you go to the trading statue, which is guarded night and day, and you're able to touch and take from the giving, then your luck will increase. There's tons of things that will increase with your ability to kind of see markets and, horse trade and stuff like that. If you make the pilgrimage out to the middle of the ocean to the giant lighthouse where the statue is and you are able to touch him and fight through his protectors and touch the give. But in the same way, if you touch the take hand, then that portion of you is taken away and given back to the god, quote unquote, little g god. But they worship these gods as gods because all their legends speak about these gods having created all of humanity, and people don't know that the statues are actually the sort of the forms, the shells of the gods. But you go to the greatest market in the world, and that's where this sort of civilization commerce god is. So there's some connection. It's like you want your trade, you want your little market stall to be within sight of him, and it's like the prime spots are the ones in front of his face where he's the one looking at you. You know what I mean? There's lots of little voodoo stuff like that. But there's some weirdness about it, right? Because the people who they kind of grok it, certain people kind of rise up. There's like these legendary nautical captains who no one knows why they're able to navigate the seas so well. Well, because they have a secret, they understand an aspect of this. They've either given up other aspects of their life, because each person can't just continue to take from the god, because that would be so much essence that they would just die. So you have to kind of give and take and give and take. But if you give so much of your civilization aspect, you might lose your ability to sort of understand language, because in the civilization god is the understanding and the respect for the organization of people, or like the god of war. If you take and take and take and take, you're going to become violent. And if you give up other things, people will just give up everything to the ocean god, like his protectors who live on the lighthouse and island have given up all of their ocean. So they're terrified of the ocean. They can't swim. They're stuck on the rock, So there's different aspects like that. And only some people understand the significance of the statues. Everyone else just kind of worships them as the symbols of civilization or the symbol of war, not necessarily the fact that this is like the engine. And there's cults, who believe that like certain gods will listen to them and are trying to sort of waken those gods more. There's whispers about an 11th god, a dissenter who after the Great War hid and did the same sort of thing, but seeded. That's how evil was seeded, is that he gave up himself. He participated in this thing without them knowing and gave up himself. But, it's like philosophers say that no, evil is just the result of a selfish mind, an unenlightened mind. And other people say no, evil comes from this guy in particular. So that's the Pantheon.
Cool. I have like a number of questions. Like, okay, for one thing, like you mentioned that different people, have a kind of a cursory notion of these gods, but not really spend much energy focused on how alive their actual input is now in modern times or whatever. Then you have the other aspect. Is this an all or none? So if you touch, for example, if there's like a god of healing and you touch the receive hand, the palm up, receive, then they takes away from you your ability to heal. And what I'm trying to get at, like, just pick any one of them, like the harvest one, like, is it an all or none? Like, if you touch the palm up, does it all go out of you, or is it gradations?
That's a great question. I would say I would say yes, it's all or nothing.
Okay. So then these protectors, obviously part of the dynamic there is you have your protectors. Each god has their protectors, and they've given up all of theirs to just give this one
Well,
more
some of them have. The god of war, they've taken more of the god of war because that pumps up their ability to be violent.
Yeah.
Right? But the protectors have given up their aspect of the god of the sea, of the water, of nature, and that sort of locks them and keeps them on the rock because now all of nature is a mystery. Because remember, these aspects are the aspects that create and support the human psyche, right? That's what this is a cocktail of.
Right.
It's not powers, abilities, desires, or likes. It's literally the aspects of a human psyche. So the people who have given up to the nature gave up their ability to understand, like read clouds or understand the wind or anything like that,
So each of them has their own system of protection, like, right?
Yeah.
So that like, for example, the marketplace guy, if he was just standing there, everybody would come and just like drain him.
Right.
Like, and it's a finite amount of mojo that he's got to give out.
Yeah.
Right?
And maybe it is drained. Maybe he has like 10,000 units inside of him, right? For him to be complete, it's 10,000 units, right? And what you can take from him in a single touch is 100th of a single unit, right? So maybe he is completely drained because civilization is in full swing. So he is fully saturated throughout the world.
Right.
Right? So he is really just a symbol. So people don't pray to him, but people look at him as a respectful thing. Now, if society were to break down, we'll say, and I'm adding to this as I go, and people were to die, then that life force will go back to those things. So if society were to start to break down and civilization and people who held civilization in such high regard would begin to break down, then those things would start to go back to those gods. And then maybe someone would come up with some crazy scheme. They would invent cement.
Yeah.
Because of this inspiration towards civilization that would sort of come back to this god and he would be able to work. But like, I would say some of them are completely not inert, but the god of war has enough consciousness to be able to help people because they've given enough to him. You think about, like, if there was a god of healing, you take from her health or you give to her the ability to intercede, so maybe you have people who decide when they get a terminal illness to give up, not their life, but to give up their health to that god, to give that life force back to that god, and then to die in 6 months rather than a year. And then that god, kind of her sway and her ability to impact people's lives becomes more powerful. I'm not saying suicide. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying, like, people they might, you have a young priest and he might, as an offering, sacrifice some of his life to her, right? Give up some of his life force. And so he ages a little bit, but he's given up, it's like a way of showing faith.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't want to get weird. I'm not saying that people are sacrificing people to the gods, or maybe some are, but that's gross and screwed up. So what were you going to say, Seth?
Oh, it was a couple things. One, I was thinking, but I think that got solved. The one thing that I thought of, that if it goes back, if someone dies.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that they might do that with criminals, that are going to execution, to bring them and make them give up any of that part to kind of the patron god of that area,
right?
Before they die. But if that happens when they die, then
that's possible.
It probably doesn't matter. Or you have,
or maybe they're
different.
They're told that, like, they can give it up right now. Maybe people who come into prison are forced to give up to the god of war, and they just lose any sort of aggression, and they just turn into kind of not vegetables, but just kind of like, well, they'll do whatever you tell them to. They have no self-preservation anymore.
Yeah, and that was kind of the other thing I was going to get at, is kind of that, or you have the different orders where, the C one, where they might pilgrimage to, let's say, give up other aspects of different ones, so that, in a sense, the idea would be so that they're more committed
Yeah.
to one of the other ones.
If you think it'd be an interesting thought process, but if you think like if a human can hold 100 units and they're given like 10 units of each thing, or maybe a few more, a few of the other, it's like if I give up a bunch of my commerce, my understanding or grasp on civilization, but I take up a bunch more nature, all of a sudden you become this kind of weird nature guy who doesn't understand streets or fire or the need for bathing regularly, right? But he becomes more, it's like sub races, you kind of
There's a Democrat. I'm sorry, that was
I was thinking I would do that. I don't want to be near civilization.
Yeah.
But anyways, I kind of like that idea, is that they become not sub. So if you imagine this race of people, you can kind of get these offshoots who have overinvested in a certain god's thought process and given up other aspects, and their actual psyche is different. How they problem solve is different. How they think about things is different. If someone has no regard towards organized systems as far as civilization comes in, but nature is everything to them, they're going to see a problem. They're going to see the answer to a problem in a different way.
Cool.
That's the Pantheon.
All right. Well, the economic system that I understand is in a society that is pretty established. Where means of production and whatnot have solved a lot of the issues of scarcity. So people are getting along pretty well.
Right.
And little by little, as systems, developed and then became entrenched and kind of calcified.
Right.
Like, this is the way we do it because it's the way we've always done it, kind of thing. And as technology has expanded, the economy was managed, I'm using the word central bank, but because of technology, it's like all economic transactions are in the system, so to speak. So that what you have to spend, for example, is automatically at a touchpad established. So whether or not you can afford whatever it is, the purchase you're going to make or whatever, and your income and your expenditures are all in the central data file, so to speak. And it's a central banking system with no currency. It's all automatic and very smooth and streamlined and whatnot.
Yeah.
And as the system, like I say, began to calcify, certain things started taking place to rough out the edges, to smooth out the rough edges. And some things started to creep in, like wage and price control.
Right.
For the purpose of stability and tranquility at the expense of entrepreneurialism, for example. Problem with that is that was a limiting factor on ingenuity and personal individual industry, to make something. Like somebody that I know visited China, and you could look at a building or a something, and there was kind of a facade that seemed to be, kind of modern, but it was backed up with kind of shoddy workmanship.
Right.
And there was a sense that, a centralized system does not encourage individual performance. And so you just kind of go along with gray rather than sharp blacks and whites. And so this was what has happened. And as a result, a kind of a little by little kind of an intricate black market system has superimposed itself. So, a lot of the basic stuff just gets transferred and it's all on the books, so to speak. But one of the things that has happened is that there's been a real expansion in what I'm calling psycho enhancements. In other words, drugs.
Right.
Kind of if you think of Huxley's Brave New World, they've got their soma, the delta, the working stiffs, the kinds that just go on the assembly line and work their 8 hours and crank out X number of units, and then they get off work and then they are given their shot, they're addicted to this thing, but it doesn't have like the effects of like heroin where you have increasing need to, your tolerance that gets built up, but they've developed narcotics to the point where they could just use them as a kind of a mass means of control. You get off a drudge day of work and you have, a few hours of bliss, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, there's a really when I'm talking about psycho enhancement, really elaborate and sophisticated mechanisms for kind of enhancement of your workability as well as your leisure time. And these substances are not necessarily like, you think of like pills, or something that you ingest in some way. It's not necessarily substance. Some of it is tech, where you plug in and you receive these enhancements over a system, whatever would be the next iteration of technology as far
Right.
as how and so this is so these are extremely portable, which means they're readily at hand. So whereas the system did away with all currency for the purpose of control and verification, a kind of a black market parallel economic system built up with these readily transferable, and the thing is, they're so sought after that you can just I used to joke about, like, if things break down, one of the things you want to have is ammunition, like especially for readily available calibers, like 12 gauge shotgun shells and 9mm pistol rounds that you can carry around in your pocket, and you can trade them for bread, or you can use them to help keep the bread you've got, or if you're not a good guy, you can use them to take the other guy's bread. You know what I'm saying? But the thing is, the thing about currency is that fits in your pocket. You can whip out a roll of cash and you can pay for stuff. Well, that's kind of that. But then what it did is that it created a market for higher quality. So what happened is, so you sell your widgets or whatever on the regular system, but people have been complaining about them breaking down and not being reliable. And so engineering people that, have gone to the god of, industry and whatnot, they've been able to make advancements, but they don't give it up for the price because of the price fixing, this government system, there's no incentive. So what you do is you trade your high quality goods and merchandise and services on the black market for these enhanced, these psycho enhancements, so to speak. So anyway, that's what I'm looking at, is kind of a very central, organized, set in stone, cashless society, but with this parallel economy of a kind of a black market kind of thing. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, definitely does make sense.
Okay.
I like it.
All right.
You got some idea about that, Seth, or you're going to introduce your Sboabyar? I
was going to introduce my thing, but I had a couple questions.
Okay.
About how to do it. So the this Pantheon thing, in your mind, as far as what you have in mind, are you presupposing that these are the good guys, bad guys?
The Pantheon?
Yeah.
They're just the guys.
Okay.
They basically fought, and I guess you could technically call them good, because they created this race and then voluntarily gave up their own ability to sort of move around and do things to give this race, all of their energy. So that sounds kind of like
I guess it kind of answers.
But it also could just be...
Unless you had in mind, like, something where you were talking about this other guy, maybe he was more of like this...
Well, I think that there's a possibility. So my idea is that they created, like, when they created this race, for some period of time, the race was alive while they were still moving around the earth, as they were trying to figure out why the race wasn't, like, taking off or doing anything. And slowly they developed this ability to sort of siphon off their essence, which is why we have stories of them still being, like, in power and majesty, right? And then slowly the quote-unquote gods diminished, because as people started to have more children, they started to give more and more of themselves away. And then in this giving themselves away, if there was an 11th god who was sort of, my idea is that a bunch of these creatures came to this world and fought for thousands of years, and at the end, it was only the 11 left. But they thought that there was 10 left, but the 11th was hiding. So they created kind of this this race that was meant to kind of grow up and maybe become them someday, replace them in power and glory. But then there was this 11th one who put into them bits of himself, which were corruption and evil and stuff like that. So
Okay.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So that kind of answers my question for how I want to frame, and it actually works pretty good. I think I've got
Okay.
the idea here. Okay. So a book I've been reading is Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose.
Okay.
So in there, from a perspective, if people want to know what this is, I think he wrote it back in like 73 or 75. I think an updated version before he passed away came out, and
This is
somewhere
1973 or 1975?
1975 or 76, I think, or something like that, when the some of the last kind of additions or epilogues were put in it to before he died. So like the second edition or something like that, second or third one. But anyways, it's coming from a perspective of one, kind of presenting some things with the Orthodox faith, but then in countermeasure, looking at things that are creeping in into Christianity in general that are ultimately creating this religion of the future. I think in some of it, some ideas of it, is kind of come to pass. I think in like the UN, right? They have like a prayer room, but then to go in there and pray, you can't bring any of your own religious like symbology into there because it has to be for everybody, right?
Ooh, that's difficult.
And so it's like they give everyone, but then again, here we go, they give you like a black cube or something because it's kind of generic, but seems like that's whatever. And so it's the idea of it like washing down to like a universalistic idea that everyone's experience with God is with the same God. And so Buddhism to Hinduism to Christianity or Islam or Judaism or I don't know, Hare Krishnaism or whatever, it's just everybody's different cultural association to God. And so and what he's presenting is as time, gets closer to the end, that concept is going to creep in and kind of wash out Christianity.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
Kind of into this androgynous, kind of like, oh yeah, we're Christians or, kind of whatever. But then they kind of accept that, someone worshiping Buddhas, it's the same as worshiping Christ, but, it's just a different flavor of God, and kind of putting that into a perspective, with ideas of that as it moves towards, as it is the end, that the, part of the deception, in the end time will be the, exception of pagan practices as if they are nothing different than their own, and kind of accepting a false concept of stuff. But anyways, that's what the book is about, if anyone is interested.
Cool.
I've just about got to the chapter where he starts going to talk about UFOs and stuff like that, so I'm curious.
That's great. That actually sounds really interesting.
But yeah, I have a little bit of an idea, being that I listened to one of his lectures where someone asked him about something and he said something, so I kind of have an idea of where he's going to go with it, but I'm still kind of excited to get into seeing what he has to say about UFOs, if anyone's into that stuff. But anyways, the first little bit that I've read so far, that it has to do about some of the concepts in like particularly like Hinduism and some of the Buddhist stuff, particularly the Hinduism and like yoga and all this like meditation and a lot of the stuff from the East that has creeped in and is kind of putting the wool over people's eyes as to where its end goal is, and kind of getting, in this case, Christians to accept some of these practices that ultimately kind of funnel back to some of these yogi and Hindu deities, which are ultimately almost completely antithetical to anything Christian.
Right.
But so some of those concepts in there, which I think will fit into this well enough, is this idea that one of those practices that, started with, it started quite a while back, but even then back in like the 60s and 70s, everyone was getting into this kind of the religions of the East were starting to hit the West a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's been really interesting because I've, studied some of that, as it was, being involved with martial arts and different things. So there's a lot of this stuff that I'm, kind of aware of, but it's just like not realizing that it's like even more so than I ever kind of thought. But one of the things is about some of like the different meditation stuff, kind of cycling back power to something else that's not proper. And so I'm going to use some of that idea. So in this thing, which I think it'll work out well, if to kind of pull into this villain, this other 11th god idea. So everyone's kind of giving and receiving different aspects, and there's ups and downs, goods and bads to all of that. But kind of take this concept, perhaps something that is eking in is this kind of meditatal idea where you're giving up.
Right.
So one of the
it's like
things with the meditation,
it's like a new craze about how to do things.
yeah, but not like how to do things, but it's like unbeknownst to you, you're giving up a lot of this power that you have,
right,
to this other deity,
right.
In the idea that, so in the concept of this, like with a lot of like some of the Zen, some of the particularly yoga, and there's one that kind of took a phase, and it's actually this last one is a little bit more ambiguous, but I think it's like transmutational meditation. I might have said that wrong, but
Transcendental meditation.
Transcendental meditation, where it's just like it hit the scene to kind of like make a profit off of it, but pretend like it wasn't attached to anything religious, so that anyone could just take 20 minutes a day. And I read the back of a cereal box and I saw it on there. It's like, take a 20 minutes in the morning and the evening to just calm yourself and meditate. And I'm like, oh, that's this, because that's exactly what this is trying to tell people to do. Whereas, like, obviously it's good to kind of like set aside time for prayer and reflection and stuff like that, but in the particular sense of some of this, or particular in some of the Zen or the yoga stuff, is you are like finding for lack of better terms, that inner peace idea, where a lot of people will use this in any of their religious practices, and they'll say, oh, I know we were all at a certain thing where the speaker talked about Christian yoga that he attended, and has that idea where it gives an amount of peace because you're, in essence, letting go of certain things,
right,
opening up, really, and kind of getting kind of a small amount of calm, like peace with the world around you.
right.
But ultimately, what you're giving is opening yourself up to, all kinds of different like spiritual attachments that are kind of attached to this, kind of an emptying a vessel idea. And if it's empty of everything, then it's kind of acceptant of everything else around it.
Yeah, I get it.
I have this,
and so I think that what's going on is this thing is creeping in, where then the people in the know, who then want, let's say, more power for themselves or whatever, want the general populace to give up more of their thing. And so by doing this, maybe you're not giving up like a whole aspect, but it just kind of eats away at little aspects as you just kind of like step back and kind of, what's the one where you just like don't, is it nihilism?
Well, what are you getting at?
Is nihilism is the one where it's like nothing matters, and right?
Yeah, I don't know what the
So
exact
that would,
definition of nihilism, but it's like there's nothing after this. So
Eat, drink.
yeah, so maybe kind of like a concept of that, where that it's like maybe not all at once, but keeps breaking down and inching away through like an emptying out without having to touch the statues. And maybe that's why it's going back to this other deity, this more like kind of hidden, unseen one, is then he's receiving the power off of these people that are then, reaping a little bit of benefit of this, because it's like, oh, now I can, calmly go through traffic, and, now these things just don't worry me anymore. And this is just kind of like, oh, at peace. But then you have to kind of do more. And then like, it's like that little bit isn't good enough, so you have to do more. And then that kind of scratches the itch. And so then that works for a minute, and then you have to do more.
right.
Until it just kind of...
And I can see that these drugs that Reed was talking about that are part of his economy are ways that people, they've been created by powers that be to make turmoil in people's lives, to drive them towards this thing, but it's also ways to sort of tap into the different aspects, kind of like a program to tap into the different aspects and maybe flare up the portion of the war god, which is competition, which is, the portions of the psyche which have to do with aggression, which isn't all bad. It's competition, it's authority, it's assertiveness, it's standing up for yourself. It's all these different, but it flares it up and they become kind of crazy. These drugs can do this where they just become kind of crazy, or it flares up a different thing. I've heard of a lot of people who have taken acid, and then I had a friend who had a trip on acid, and he was just having a terrible time the entire time, talking about how terrible stuff was. But then after he came off of it, he said how much he learned and how it was just peaceful and beautiful. And it's oh, it wasn't peaceful and beautiful for us, my dude, And in the same way, the people wake up from this weird trip and they're like, wow, what a great experience. And everyone else is like, you're in jail because you assaulted people with a knife.
Right.
And he's just like, what are you talking about? And then that sort of forces people to be like, okay, go to this mental hospital. Mental hospitals aren't bad, but go to this mental hospital or go to this prison or practice this regimen, in order to cure your maladies. You could even have it where there's propaganda that speaks to how just really bad aggression is. And yeah, we force it away from criminals, but you could get rid of some of your aggression too, and they sort of herd people into sending this energy that leaves them to this 11th god instead of who it's supposed to return to.
Oh my, we've got a good villain here.
Because the answer is, what needs to happen is, as soon as that whichever god gets enough power put back to them and wakes up and gets enough wakes up enough that they can start seriously answering prayers and interceding directly. And then even if the statue doesn't wake up, people will flock to them. And it's who is going to get the most support first,
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I
don't know, Seth, if that adds on to your thing.
No, it works. It works perfectly, I think.
Seth, this is sort of an aside, but when you were talking about, I'm old enough so that I kind of remember the 60s and 70s. And, when George Harrison of the Beatles, they picked up the sitar and recorded some and went through his Eastern mysticism phase, right? And then Keith Richards, I saw an interview, Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, who's standing there with his ever-present bottle of Jack, and they said, well, what do you think? Are you going to go the way of the Beatles and Eastern mysticism? He says, nah, I draw the line at Swami's. I just thought, as he took another swig from his bottle of Jack Daniels, I thought that was really funny.
Or what was the band read that was kind of decent, but then they just kept they had brain salad surgery.
Oh yeah,
they just
Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yeah, they just kept going into it, and it just kept getting weirder and weirder until you just couldn't really understand what in the world they were doing at the end.
Yeah, well, Emerson, Lake and Palmer was absolutely fantastic. Their Threshold of a Dream, and oh man, or was that that was the Moody Blues? I forget. Anyway, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, fabulous. Were one of the pioneers of the electronic explosion in rock music, the Moog synthesizer and all that. And then by the end, they put out an album called Brain Salad Surgery that was just gone, just flat gone. Those poor people, they were toasted, and I guess he had to be there, but it was cool.
Yeah, there's a video game called Cyberpunk 2077 based on a universe, a kind of a cyberpunk universe, and they have this thing where you can get augments, like new eyes or new arms, or you can get cool augments onto your body. But your psyche can only hold so many because it's connecting to your brain, and people who get too many and can't handle it go psycho, right? So then they turn into these sort of murderous maniacs because they have new legs so they can run at 50 miles an hour, and they have new arms so they can punch through a brick wall. And so you have to go, and I think it's an optional thing or not, but a person will be like, hey, can you go and kill this psycho over here? And so you travel to that part of the city, and then they're typically crazy, and you try to reason with them or try to talk to them. And I think there's some options for saving them, but I don't know. That was just a thing I was thinking about when you were talking about this. These kind of intense experiences, not just pacifying people, but also hyping them up, People aren't just swallowing pills to like forget their day of hard labor, but they're also swallowing pills when they want to like fight a guy in a bar, anyways. So I think that's good for this week. We've done some interesting world building. I think it's good. We'll come back next week with some additional, unless anyone has any cool ideas here at the end of all things. Reed?
Yep.
No.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Wait It Gets Better. If you would like to contact us with your cool ideas, you can send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. I'm happy to hear your suggestions, have a conversation about your cool ideas. And until next time, just hold on, guys. Just wait, okay? It's going to get better next time. Bye.